All right, approaches to the book. Now here the rubber meets the road. This is difficult. Basically, the approaches look at the time the prophecies of the book were fulfilled or will be fulfilled. I should say were fulfilled or will be. The first viewpoint is the preterist school. What does preterist mean, student? It's a Latin word that means what? Pardon? Yeah, past. This means past. So they say the book has already been fulfilled by and large. The prophecies have been fulfilled. Now, and I'm being overly simplistic here, there are basically two different preterist schools. Here's the first. Fulfilled by and large by the time of Constantine, that should be 312, not 712, by 312. And here's what they say. Those who take this viewpoint, this is not as contemporary, you might find some, but older preterists took this. The chapters 5 to 11 look at victory over Judaism. Chapters 5 to 11, victory over Judaism. Chapters 12 to 19, victory over Roman paganism. Now, the big advantage of this interpretation, it sees the book in the first century setting. There's undoubtedly, the Jews were persecuting Christians. Undoubtedly, Rome was persecuting Christianity. So you can see that this would be the setting of the book. It sets it in the first century setting. You have to admit that. There are a couple of problems with it, however. First, you must allegorize the text. I mean wildly allegorize the text. Israel doesn't mean Israel. 12 tribes don't mean the 12 tribes, etc. You have to allegorize the text. And the second objection is, where's the history of the church after Constantine? Where's the history of the church after Constantine? From Constantine to Revelation 20. Where's the history of the church from Constantine to Revelation 20? They just say, well, it's not there, and that would be their answer. The big objection, of course, is the hermeneutic, allegorizing. But you do have a question. Where, if you go up to Constantine at 312, and then what do you do with chapters 19 to 20? I mean, what all that time between 19 and 20? Preterists, by and large, number 2 in the next page, if you would. The main preterists today take this view, that the book was fulfilled by and large in AD 70, and there are some big names that take that. For instance, Sproul takes this. Gentry, Chilton take the idea that it was fulfilled in the destruction of Jerusalem. They usually take, and I'll take a little sideline here, preterists usually take two main sections to prove their point. One is the Olivet Discourse, and they say that's been fulfilled already. And then the other is the destruction of Jerusalem, and they take Revelation for that. So they take these two passages, the Olivet Discourse and Revelation, the book of Revelation. They say this has been fulfilled. Among the preterists, there's a wide divergency. There are some that are mild, some medium, and some that are extreme. For instance, the extreme preterists say there's no second coming of Christ. He came already. He came in the destruction of Jerusalem. There's no second coming of Christ. There's just going to be a general resurrection and judgment, and that's it. So there's no second coming of Christ. It happened already. Now, to do that, of course, you have to see it's spiritualized. Sproul does not take that. Sproul believes that Christ came the first time. He's going to come the second time, but he believes that there is also this, like I should say, he came in his original coming. There's a second coming in the destruction of Jerusalem and a third coming in the future. But he takes it that Christ came in that sense. Well, let's take a look at it. Fulfilled by and large by AD 70, Revelation chapters 4 to 20 describe the destruction of Jerusalem. Chapters 4 to 20, the destruction of Jerusalem. Revelation would be written from about 64 to 67, someplace in there. The date of Revelation then would be 64 to 67, depending on where you put it. And they would say Christ came in the destruction of Jerusalem. That's his coming. He came in the destruction of Jerusalem. And of course, as I said, the medium preterists like Sproul think he's coming again, but he came then. Some objections to this. Well, by the way, I should say that the thing in favor of it is it again puts the book in its first century setting. It does put us in the first century setting. It would be that before the destruction of Jerusalem, then you have the destruction of Jerusalem described in Revelation, so it would be putting it in its first century setting, and it would fit that. The objections. The first one is external evidence. Strong external evidence puts it in the day of Domitian. Strong external evidence. For instance, Irenaeus. Now remember the sequence? Who was the disciple, the church father, the disciple of John? Polycarp. You have John, Polycarp. Who is the disciple of Polycarp? Irenaeus. Now that's close. So you have John, Polycarp, and Irenaeus. And Irenaeus very specifically says it was written during the time of Domitian. He names Domitian. Irenaeus, Eusebius, Jerome, strong early tradition. I don't think you have anybody that puts it earlier than this until about the 5th century. The second thing is internal evidence. And here are some things. The 7 churches appear to be second-generation churches. The 7 churches appear to be second-generation churches. Interestingly, just one illustration. Polycarp said that Smyrna, remember that's the second, we'll look at the outline, we'll look at the geography in just a minute. The first church is Ephesus, the second is Smyrna. Polycarp said that Smyrna had no church from AD 60 to 64. Very interesting. Polycarp said the church, Smyrna did not have a church between AD 60 and 64, and yet this letter is addressed to the church of Smyrna. You know, it's you'd have to, that's hard to explain. Laodicea. Laodicea is the last church, the 7th church, is described as being wealthy, rich. Yet they had a horrible earthquake in AD 60-61. Now here's the argument. Now follow me carefully. The argument is Laodicea is seen as wealthy. And if you say it's written between about 64 to 67, and they had this horrible earthquake which just decimated it in 61, how could it be wealthy? Well, you can argue it the other way around. I'm a little careful about using that argument. Here's why. When Laodicea was, are you tired? Are you with me? We got a little time before the joke. No, time for the joke. Time for the joke. I'll come back to Laodicea in a minute. I don't know if you've ever heard of Stephen Wright. Have you ever heard of him? He's the man who said, I woke up one morning and all my stuff had been stolen and replaced by exact duplicates. And these are some stupid things that he said. Borrow money from pessimists. They don't expect it back. Half the people you know are below average. 99% of lawyers give the rest a bad name. I'd kill for a Nobel Peace Prize. 42.7% of all statistics are made up on the spot. A conscience is what hurts when all the other parts feel good. Some of these are true like this. Depression is merely anger without enthusiasm. Boy, the early bird may get the worm, but the second mouse gets the cheese. Okay, so what's the speed of dark? What's the speed of dark? Eagles may soar, but weasels don't get sucked into jet engines. On and on. Okay, we're talking about the church at Laodicea when I was so rudely interrupted. We were saying the church at Laodicea is described in the book of Revelation as being rich, yet in 61 they had a horrible, devastating earthquake. And if you say the book is written between 64 and 67, how can you say they're wealthy? Well, you can answer that. If I were a preterist, I would answer that by saying, well, interestingly, when the Roman government offered them help, they took no help. They said, we'll fix this ourselves, we'll do it on our own. So the very fact that they would say, we'll do it on our own, it would indicate they still had some wealth. You know, you could still say they're wealthy. You have to be careful about using that argument. But there is the evidence, as you go through the book, for instance, Ephesians seems to be, you have different problems in Ephesians than you do in 2 Timothy. And if you say that Revelation is written 64 to 67, you're getting awfully close to the time 2 Timothy was written. And yet they're totally different doctrinal problems and so on. So when you look at it, the internal evidence does indicate that the church is older than that. So I don't think it was fulfilled in the past. There's the historicist school. This is hard to explain. It was taken by the reformers, by and large. It believes that I call it the continuous historical interpretation. The continuous historical interpretation. What I mean by that is these people would do exactly like some premillennialists do, pre-tribulationists do. They would take the book as being fulfilled from the time of John up to their time. Remember the reformers? The Pope is the Antichrist. So that, they take it up to their time. So wherever you live, that's where the book ends. Do you follow what I'm saying? So now we're saying, the book ends with us. I mean, we're getting ready to get into the tribulation. The book is ready to, chapter 4 is ready to start right now. So they would take the book up to the present time. It's not exactly like we say, but it's basically a panorama of church history up to the point you are living. A couple of problems. The first one is it makes all the references to Israel symbolic. It makes all the references to Israel symbolic. You'll find the majority of commentaries, no, I shouldn't say that because there are so many commentaries written by pre-Mills on Revelation. But it seems like everybody who wants to write a commentary writes on Revelation. There are so many commentaries. But the Amills basically make all references to Israel symbolic. Secondly, there's no agreement on the interpretation because you've got to change as history progresses. There's no agreement because you must change as history progresses. You have to have a new Antichrist, a new, you have to change it according to where you are in history. So when I say, it's hard to explain it, that wherever you are, from John up to then, that's what the book is describing. And so it depends on where you are living. And so consequently, you have to constantly change the interpretation of the book. The third interpretation is the idealist school. You find this in Protestants and Roman Catholics. It shows the conflict of ideals. It shows the conflict of ideals. For instance, let me quote from Milligan in his commentary on Revelation of St. John, page 154. He says this: "We are not to look in the apocalypse for special events, but for an exhibition of the principles which govern the history of the world and the church." So it's just ideals, the fighting of this. I was reading another commentary written by a man named Corsini, a Roman Catholic, and same idea. The problem, again, is it's symbolic. Good night. If it's idealistic, you just have to interpret everything as symbolically. So this leads now to the futurist school. And I'll take a flurry of drums and trumpets. This is the one we hold. Basically, it says Revelation chapters 4 to 22 are still future. Revelation 4 to 22 are still future. And I take three advantages of it. First, takes the text as literally as possible. Now, I have to recognize apocalyptic material is symbolic, but you take it as literally as possible. The second advantage, Israel means Israel. Israel means Israel. Do you know how many times the word Israel occurs in the New Testament? 65. Guess what it means every time? Israel. I mean, if it means Israel, so you take it as being Israel. Thirdly, this fits with Old Testament, the book fits with Old Testament prophecies. If you take the futuristic viewpoint, it fits with Old Testament prophecies, especially Daniel. Fits with Old Testament prophecies. The sixth point is somewhat repetitive because we're talking about the date. Two alternatives are propounded here: the time of the persecution of Nero or that of Domitian. You see, if you're a preterist, you'd say it was written during the time of Nero. If you're a futurist, you'd say Domitian. The factors that swing the decision in favor of Domitian's persecutions are the following. We've discussed this already, but let me put a few more down. Number one, persecution was more universal under Domitian than Nero. Remember when we discussed 1 Peter? It was spotty, it was intermittent throughout the Roman Empire. Under Domitian, it was a practice of the Roman government. Persecution was more universal under Domitian than Nero. Number two, the worship of the beast seems to be a figure of emperor worship. Yeah, the worship of the beast. Remember, you have the worship of the beast. If you don't worship it, you're going to be put to death and so on. The worship of the beast seems to be a figure of emperor worship. In other words, the emperor worship and the worship of the beast seem to go together. Morris, in his commentary, says, all are agreed that the significant advance in emperor worship took place in the reign of Domitian. The third thing, the seven churches seem to have considerable history. We've talked about that. The seven churches seem to have considerable history. Fourth, the external evidence. We discussed that as well. Irenaeus, etc. The external evidence puts the date later. I think we could be quite dogmatic that the book was written around the time of Domitian. Now, it's interesting. Boy, there's so much here. When you look at the history of Domitian, there's not that much evidence in contemporary literature that Domitian persecuted the church. You can only get that from external statements, like the fathers and so on that wrote later. The purposes of the book. The purpose of the book. First, to encourage the church to endure. Don't give up. Or as Winston Churchill said, never give up. Never, 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 never give up. To encourage the churches to endure. Keep at it. Secondly, to challenge to godly living. To challenge them to godly living. In spite of the persecution, in spite of the hardship, in spite of the difficulties, live godly lives. The eighth thing by way of introduction is the theme of the book. The theme is very simple. The theme is very clear. God will ultimately be victorious in Christ. God will ultimately be victorious in Christ. I love that. You know what that says, people? We are on the winning side. That's what that's saying. God will ultimately be victorious in Christ. The Lamb, the Lion will overcome, he'll be victorious. We're on the winning side. Vernon Grounds, a number of years ago in Christianity Today, wrote a little article about the attitude we should have in persecution. And he was using the book of Revelation as illustration. He talked about a seminary president, and he used to be the president of Denver Theological Seminary. He's still alive, he's still with us, but he's retired. And a dear brother, gracious gentleman. And he told of a seminary, probably he's thinking of his own, that had a basketball team, but they didn't have a gymnasium in which to practice, and so they used the neighboring high school gym after 6 o'clock at night. And they would practice night after night. And in the bleachers, there'd be a custodian just waiting for the boys to finish practicing, the men to finish practicing. And one of them noticed that one night he was reading a Bible. He said, "What are you reading?" He said, "I'm reading the Bible." He said, "I see you're reading the Bible, but well, what are you reading in the Bible?" He said, "I'm reading the book of the Revelation." "You're reading the Revelation?" "Yeah." "Do you understand it?" "Yeah, I do." Well, the seminarian was dumbfounded because he didn't understand the book, and here's the simple custodian. "Well, what does it say?" The custodian said, "It says Jesus is going to win." And then Grounds goes on to say, that's the best summary of the book of Revelation he's ever seen. And that's true. Jesus is going to win. That's the theme of the book. Wonderful, wonderful. We're on page 4 talking about the structure of the book of Revelation. You will recall that we said the key verse to the book is Revelation 1:19. Write the things that you have seen, That's chapter 1, where you have a revelation, this amazing picture of Christ. Write the things which you've seen, then write the things which are. Those are the 7 churches of chapters 2 and 3. Then the things which shall be after these things. That's the prophetic section from chapters 4 to 22. It's quite important that you recognize that that's the outline we're going to be using. We move now to, and the theme of the book is God is going to win. We're on the winning side. The structure of the book, difficult subject. Number of schemes may be followed. In the interest of time, I'd like to just go past capital letter A, come to capital letter B, outlined by recapitulation, and more than one scheme is developed here. For instance, some say that chapters 4 to 11 are recapitulated in chapters 12 to 19. We will take a modification of that, but right now they say that chapters 4 to 12 are recapitulated in 4 to 11 are recapitulated in chapters 12 to 19. Or others say, remember you have 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls, and they say they recapitulate each other. I've tried that, and that dog won't hunt. And they just don't fit with each other, but some try to force that anyway. I don't think it's that. So we come to capital letter C, an outline based on 119. Chapter 1, what you've seen, 2 to 3, which are. Chapters 4 to 22, the things which take place after these things. 2 objections to this outline. First, unbalanced. Unbalanced. Good night. Look at it. 1 chapter for the first point, 2 chapters for the second point, and then you have 4 to 22 for the last point. That's like some preacher's sermons. It's just unbalanced points. But I think that the future is the emphasis of the book. That's intentional. Yes, it is unbalanced. I have to grant that. But I think that's intentional to get across the future. The second objection is much stronger. It makes the bulk of the book irrelevant to the 7 churches. It makes the bulk of the book irrelevant to the 7 churches. If you believe in the pre-trib rapture, the churches won't be here during the tribulation. You see what I'm getting at? If you believe in the pre-trib rapture, we won't be here. Well, the answer to that is a passage that I tried to drive home. We tried to drive home so many this semester. But 2 Peter 3:11, when he talks about the passing of the earth with fire and so on, and then it says, what sort of people should we be? And the point I'm making is, you can have a future event in which you're not going to participate become a motivation for godly living. And that's what you have in 2 Peter 3:11. If the world is going to be destroyed like this, what sort of people should we be now? So likewise, you can have the tribulation described, and the principle of 2 Peter 3:11 would be appropriate. Which leads, if I may, to the development of the book. And here the basic question revolves around the relationship of the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, and the 7 bowls to each other. This class will discuss the book assuming a telescopic arrangement. You know, you pull out one section, another comes, another, and then another. And what I'm after is this. If you can reproduce something like this on your notes, this is how we will develop the book. Oh, I'm sorry, that does make a difference, Bill. Thank you. The 7 seals. The 7th seal introduces the 7 trumpets. The 7th trumpet introduces the 7 bowls. I really, when I think of it now, I should have a big black line here with some space in it. And a big black line here with some space in it, just to drive that point home. But I'd like to defend that. You may want to jot this down very quickly, and then I'll defend it a bit, if I may. The 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls. Now, if I may, let me defend this. First, there's a break before the 7th seal and the 7th trumpet. There's a break before the 7th seal and the seventh trumpet. Now, unless you've studied the book of Revelation already, that means nothing to you. So if you will, step over to chapter 6. Chapter 6. Don't write anything down here. I just want you to notice this first. There's a break before the seventh seal. So chapter 6, verse 1, you have the first seal. Verse 3, second seal. Verse 5, third seal. Verse 7, fourth seal. Verse 9, fifth seal. Verse 12, sixth seals. They come in order like that, and then you have the whole of chapter 7. Verse 1, after this I saw, so you have a break, 7, 1 to 17, and then chapter 8, verse 1, when he broke the seventh seal. You get what I'm saying? There's a big break between the sixth and the seventh seal. All right, let's look at the trumpets. You notice that you find in chapter 8, verse 7, the first sounded, verse 8, the second, verse 10, the third, verse 12, the fourth, verse 13, the fifth, and then you find, the 9, 1, the fifth, 9, 13, the sixth, the sixth, the sixth, the sixth, and you don't find the seventh until you come to chapter 11, verse 15. And the seventh angel sounded. So the first break is 7, 1 to 17. The second break is 10, 1 to 11, 14. There's obvious they're separating the seventh seal from the other seals, the seventh trumpet from the other trumpets, so that you can see there is something special about that seventh seal and seventh trumpet. The second reason why I think this is correct. The seventh seal introduces the seven trumpets. The seventh seal introduces the seven trumpets. The seventh trumpet seems, I can't be dogmatic in this one, the seventh trumpet seems to introduce the seven bowls. Let me explain. The seventh seal introduces the seven trumpets. The seventh trumpet seems to introduce the seven bowls. If you will, chapter 8, verses 1 and 2. Take a look at it. And when he broke the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about a half hour. That's an amazing thing. We'll talk about that. And I saw the seven angels who stand before God, and seven trumpets were given to them. So the seventh seal very clearly is introducing the seven trumpets. You can just see that. When you open that, then there's seven trumpets. Now, if you will, come to the seventh trumpet. Chapter 11, verse 15. And the seventh angel sounded, and when that happens, there's this song, and then verse 19. And the temple of God which is in heaven was opened. Now I'll turn to chapter 15, verse 8. Chapter 15, verse 8. We read, this is in connection now with the preparation for the seven bowls. 15:8, and the temple was filled with smoke. 16:1, and I heard a loud voice from the temple. So this opening of the temple seems to introduce the seven bowls. That's why I say it seems to introduce. I can't be dogmatic about that at all, but it seems to introduce the seven bowls. The reason I'm saying, by the way, I should put a heavy black line is because of that large interlude between 6 and 7 and 6 and 7 here. The third line of defense. The seven bowls are called the seven last plagues. The seven bowls are called the last plagues, I should say, not the seven last plagues. They're called the last plagues. 15, verse 1. And I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, the seven angels who had seven plagues, which are the last, implying that it's the last in the sequence. In fact, students, when we come to this, we're going to find there's a period of time for this and a period of time for this. When this happens, it's a very brief period of time. It's rat-a-tat-tat-tat-tat. I mean, just these seven are going to come very, very quickly in the seven last. The fourth thing, the seventh bowl is introduced with the words, it is finished, it is done. The seventh bowl is introduced with, it is done. 16:17. And the seventh angel poured out his bowl upon the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne, saying, "It is done." So I basically take the idea that we have this telescopic arrangement. Now, one more modifying point. Slip over. Am I going too fast? Are you with me all so far? I think you can follow this very clearly. The modifying point is chapter 10, verse 11. And they said to me, the angels, they said to me, "You must prophesy again concerning many peoples and nations and tongues and kings." Prophesy again. I believe it was Ironside who said that this is one of the most important statements in the book of Revelation. Prophesy again. What does that mean? Well, I take it that chapters 11 to 14 look back to 4:11. May I say that again? Chapters 11 to 14 look back to 4 to 10. But chapters 11 to 14 look back to chapters 4 to 10. Now, what I'm getting at is this. When you look at chapters 11 to 14, the emphasis is on people. It's not on events as much. Yes, there are events, but you don't have the plagues, you don't have the bowls, you don't have these catastrophes. Instead, you have people that are involved. The Antichrist, the false prophet, the woman that you wrote about in chapter 12. No, we haven't written about that yet, but by the way, there's a mistake in the syllabus. It should be 12:1, not 12:18. 12:1 is what that should be. Who is the woman in 12:1? That makes a bit of a difference. So that's right. There's no woman in 12:18. Who is the woman in 12:1? That should be. But anyway, what I'm getting at is, in these chapters, he's prophesying again about what he has said in chapters 4 to 10. But here the emphasis is on the people. That's why he says, prophesy again concerning peoples and nations and tongues and kings. And so there's this hiatus, I take it, of recapitulation there.
In the notes later on at 10:11, it says that, again, in chapter 11 through 15, recapitulates 6 through 9.
Okay, it's basically the same. Okay. Because chapter 10, you just have the vision of the two. It's the same thing, basically. Yeah. Thank you for that, though. I'll have to change my notes to make that straight. Okay, that's the introduction to the book. This is where I wanted to stop the last class, and we didn't make it.